Take the pen, sign on line 4, and do not look back at him." My attorney whispered those exact words as I laid the heavy silver pen onto the notary's mahogany desk. Sitting across from me, my husband of 7 years pushed a folded envelope toward me, his voice trembling. "You're really doing this without even making a scene?" I didn't answer him. I signed my name in complete, icy silence. He had no idea that while he was standing there, thinking he had managed to quietly exit our marriage without paying a price, his world was already collapsing back at his mother's house. He thought he was going to walk out of that legal office, pick up his packed bags, and move straight into my sister's apartment to start a new life with her and their newborn twins. He didn't know that my mother-in-law had just opened the registered mail envelope I dispatched 3 hours earlier. If you're new here, subscribe. I post a new story every day. Because trust me, when a betrayal runs this deep inside a family, silence isn't just golden, it's deadly. Now here's where I'd have lost it, but I stayed dead quiet. Let me take you back to how this nightmare actually started, because you need to understand the sheer level of audacity we're dealing with here. For 10 years, my husband, Mark, and I tried to build a life together. We bought a home, we built our savings, and for 5 of those years, we tried to start a family. Countless doctor visits, endless tests, and tears shed over negative results. And through every single heartbreak, my younger sister, Sarah, was sitting on my living room couch, hugging me, holding my hand, and telling me, "God has a plan for you, sis. Just be patient." Wait, read that part again in your head. While she was hugging me and handing me tissues, she was secretly meeting my husband at a hotel 2 towns over. I'll be honest, I didn't expect what came next, because I used to look up to Sarah. She was my younger sister, the one I protected growing up, the one I helped pay college tuition for when our parents passed away. I treated her like my own child. And how did she repay me? By sleeping with my husband for over a year while I was spending our life savings on IVF treatments. The story they told themselves was that Mark was desperate to be a father, and Sarah was just helping him fulfill his dream. Can you imagine the level of twisted mental gymnastics it takes to justify tearing down your own sister's home under the excuse of starting a family? Let me know in the comments below, if your own sibling betrayed you like this, would you cut them off instantly, or would you confront them face to face? For months, I noticed the subtle changes. Mark started locking his phone screen face down on the nightstand. Sarah suddenly stopped coming over for Sunday dinners, claiming she was working late shifts at her office. And my mother-in-law, Evelyn, who used to treat me like the daughter she never had, suddenly became cold and distant. Evelyn was the classic family matriarch. Everything had to be proper, everything had to be honorable, and family reputation was her absolute top priority. Whenever I mentioned our struggles with fertility, Evelyn would sigh, look out the window, and say, "Well, a family line needs an heir, Clara. Time is moving on." I thought she was just being an old-fashioned, insensitive mother-in-law. I had no idea that Sarah had already gone behind my back, met with Evelyn privately, and dropped the bomb that she was pregnant with twins. And instead of telling me, instead of putting a stop to the madness, Evelyn chose to keep the secret. She thought if Mark quietly divorced me, signed over his share of our joint asset value, and moved in with Sarah, the family could cover up the scandal and pretend. The twins were born after a clean separation. They planned the whole thing behind my back like a corporate merger. They thought I was just the naive, grieving wife who would sign whatever settlement paper they put in front of me and fade away into the background. Would you have stayed quiet if you found out your entire family conspired behind your back, or would you have made a public scene immediately? Take a second, think about it, and let me know below. Here is where their perfect little master plan started to unravel. They thought I didn't know about the twins. They thought Sarah's extended retreat to a wellness cabin in another state was a foolproof cover story. What they didn't realize was that 2 weeks before the final divorce decree was drafted, Sarah's own best friend couldn't carry the guilt anymore. She came to my house at 11 o'clock at night, sat at my kitchen counter crying, and handed me a folder full of printed text messages, ultrasound images, and bank transfers from Mark's private account. I sat at that table until 4 in the morning, looking at photos of my husband holding ultrasound scans with my sister, dated the exact week I was undergoing my third round of fertility hormones. The pain was so sharp it almost knocked the wind out of me. My husband, my sister, and my mother-in-law were all in on it. They had created a secret group chat called New Beginnings, where they discussed how to break the news to me after the legal divorce papers were finalized, so Mark wouldn't have to forfeit his share of our marital home in a fault-based settlement. They were waiting for me to sign away my rights so Mark could claim his half of the equity to buy a suburban house for Sarah and the twins. I sat there in the dark, staring at those printed messages, and a cold, calm clarity washed over me. I realized that screaming, crying, or throwing a physical fit would give them exactly what they wanted, a reason to call me unstable, and push the narrative that Mark had to leave me because I lost my mind over fertility struggles. No, I wasn't going to give them that gift. I called the top forensic divorce attorney in the city the very next morning at 8 a.m. I handed him the folder, laid out every bank statement, and said, "I don't want a penny more than what is rightfully mine, but I want every single legal asset freeze, non-disclosure document, and property transfer executed before he realizes I know." Asterisk. When someone double-crosses you this badly, do you think silence and cold legal maneuvering work better than an explosive public confrontation? Let me know your verdict in the comments. For 3 straight weeks, I played the part of the heartbroken, passive wife. When Mark brought home the initial divorce settlement draft, he looked at me with this fake, pitiful expression and said, "Clara, I just think we've grown apart. We want different things out of life now." Asterisk. I looked him straight in the eyes, swallowed every drop of rage inside my body, and nodded slowly. I said, "I understand, Mark. If you feel this marriage is broken, I won't hold you hostage." You should have seen the relief flood his face. He literally exhaled, smiled slightly, and patted my shoulder like I was a business partner agreeing to dissolve a contract. He had no idea that while he was mentally packing his bags, my attorney had already filed a financial subpoena on his hidden accounts and served a formal notice of fraud and asset concealment directly to his mother's home address via certified courier, timed to land the exact hour of our settlement signing. Mark thought today was the day he walked away free. He sat across from me at the notary's desk, signed his name on his copy, and watched me sign mine without a single tear falling from my eyes. He picked up his pen, slid his copy into his leather briefcase, and stood up. He leaned across the table and whispered, "Thank you for making this dignified, Clara. You really are a class act." Asterisk. I looked at him, smiled faintly, and said, "Go home to your mother, Mark. She's waiting for you." He walked out of that building feeling like a king who had outsmarted his past. He drove 20 minutes across town to his mother's house, where he planned to pick up his luggage, celebrate with a bottle of wine, and go meet Sarah at the hospital where the twins were delivered 48 hours prior. He pulled into Evelyn's driveway, stepped through the front door with a grin on his face, and shouted, "It's done, Mom." She signed everything without asking a single question. Asterisk. He walked into the grand living room, and stopped dead in his tracks. Evelyn was sitting in her high-backed armchair near the fireplace, holding a thick stack of court papers in her shaking, age-spotted hands. Her face was completely drained of color. She looked 50 years older. Mark laughed nervously, stepping forward. "Mom. What's wrong? Why do you look like you've seen a ghost?" Asterisk. Evelyn slowly turned her head toward him, her eyes wide with total terror, and her voice cracked as she whispered, "She didn't tell you, did she?" Asterisk. Mark took 2 slow steps into the living room, the grin completely vanishing from his face. He dropped his leather briefcase onto the hardwood floor, staring at his mother as if she had just spoken to him in a foreign language. "What are you talking about, Mom?" he asked, his voice suddenly sounding thin and strained. "What didn't she tell me? I just came straight from the lawyer's office." Clara signed the final agreement, gave up her claim to the secondary account, and walked away without making a single demand. Asterisk. Evelyn didn't move. She just raised her hands, which were shaking so violently that the legal papers rattled against each other in the quiet room. "Mark," asterisk, she whispered, her eyes brimming with cold tears. "She didn't sign the standard settlement. She signed the court's dynamic fraud addendum. Asterisk. Mark blinked, looking completely lost. The what? What does that even mean? Asterisk. Evelyn finally looked him in the eye, and the word that came out of her mouth hit him like a physical blow. Forensics. Asterisk. Now here's where I'd have loved to be a fly on the wall, because Mark had no idea how thoroughly my attorney and I had dissected his life over the past 3 weeks. He thought he was being clever by siphoning off 30% of his monthly income into a private offshore LLC over the last 18 months. He thought he was hiding those funds so he and Sarah could buy a sprawling 4-bedroom home in the suburbs once the divorce went through. What he failed to realize is that in our state, if you conceal marital assets while undergoing active divorce proceedings, it isn't just a civil dispute, it is classified as intentional financial fraud. My attorney didn't just submit those bank records to the judge, he attached every single text message between Mark, Sarah, and Evelyn planning the concealment. When Mark sat across from me at that notary desk and signed his name, he wasn't signing a peaceful separation agreement. He was signing an unalterable confession that surrendered his entire right to the equity of our home, frozen his private LLC accounts, and held him personally liable for full restitution of every dollar spent on his hidden relationship. Mark grabbed the papers out of his mother's hand, frantically flipping through the pages, his face turning from pale white to a deep, panicked red. "This can't be real," he screamed, his hands tearing through the document. "She didn't say anything. She smiled at me. She told me to come home to you." Asterisk. Evelyn covered her mouth with both hands, sobbing quietly. "Because she set a trap, Mark. She let you sign first so you couldn't dispute the terms." Asterisk. If your partner tried to hide marital assets to start a new family with your own relative, would you drain every single account legally available, or just walk away? Let me know your thoughts down below. While Mark was standing in his mother's living room hyperventilating over his frozen bank accounts, I was sitting in a local cafe down the street from the legal firm, sipping a hot cup of tea. My attorney, David, walked in, carrying his tablet and a fresh file folder. He sat down across from me, tapped the screen, and said, "The judge just signed off on the emergency freeze order. Every single account linked to his secondary business entity has been locked by the state sheriff's department." Asterisk. I took a quiet sip of my tea, feeling a sense of relief that I hadn't felt in 5 years. I looked at David and asked, "What about the hospital bill?" David smirked slightly, turning his tablet toward me. Since Sarah listed Mark as the financial guarantor for her private suite under his company card, that card just got declined when the billing department attempted to clear the deposit. Asterisk. Wait, read that part again. They had booked a luxury private maternity suite for Sarah's delivery, expecting his hidden corporate card to cover the $20,000 expense. And at the exact moment Mark was standing in his mother's living room realizing he was bankrupt, Sarah was sitting in a hospital room with 2 newborn babies, being told by the administration staff that her primary credit card had been flat-out rejected. I didn't feel a drop of guilt. Not one bit. For months, they watched me cry over fertility clinic invoices, knowing full well they were draining our joint wealth to fund their secret lifestyle. They thought I was weak because I chose not to scream at them over the dinner table. They mistook my quiet nature for stupidity. And that is the biggest mistake entitled people ever make. They assume that because you love them, you will let them destroy you without consequence. Do you think toxic family members mistake patience for weakness? How would you react if someone assumed you were too passive to fight back? Drop your verdict in the comments. Just as David was wrapping up our meeting, my phone began to vibrate on the table. I looked down at the screen. It was Sarah. She had called me 3 times in a row, followed immediately by a storm of frantic text messages. I opened the message thread, reading her exact words out loud to David. "Clara, what did you do to Mark's cards? The hospital won't discharge the babies until the deposit clears. Pick up your phone right now." Asterisk. I stared at the screen, letting out a short, quiet laugh. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She wasn't apologizing for ruining my life or sleeping with my husband. Her very first instinct when her world fell apart was to demand that I fix her financial mess. I typed out a short reply, hit send, and immediately blocked her number across every platform I owned. My message was simple. "Welcome to motherhood, Sarah. Pay your own bills." Asterisk. 10 minutes after blocking Sarah, Mark called my cell phone from his mother's landline. I decided to answer this one, putting it on speaker so David could record the conversation for our legal record. "Clara," Mark screamed into the receiver, his voice cracking with pure desperation. "Are you out of your mind? You froze the LLC holding account. That was my life savings. That was money for my children. Asterisk. I took a deep breath, spoke in a slow, steady voice, and said, "No, Mark. That wasn't your life savings. That was 50% of our marital property that you illegally siphoned off while I was paying out of pocket for fertility treatments you knew were a lie." He went quiet for a second, catching his breath, before switching to his usual manipulative tone. "Clara, please, think about the babies. They're innocent in this. They're your niece and nephew. You can't leave them stuck at the clinic because of a dispute between us." Asterisk. I almost laughed out loud at the absolute nerve of that man. He spent over a year tearing my heart to pieces, and the second consequences hit his wallet, he tried to weaponize my own empathy against me. I looked David in the eye, leaned closer to the phone, and said, "You, Sarah, and your mother made your choice when you built a secret group chat to plan my financial ruin. You wanted to start a new family. Figure out how to pay for it." And with that, I hung up. By 6 o'clock that evening, the fallout hit the rest of the family like a freight train. Evelyn, desperate to protect her golden boy's reputation and pay off the immediate hospital holds, called an emergency family gathering at her home. She invited my extended relatives, aunts, uncles, and cousins, thinking she could frame me as a spiteful ex-wife who was sabotaging 2 newborn infants out of pure bitterness. She didn't realize that David had already sent a formal copy of the forensic audit and court injunction to the family estate's legal representative. When the relatives arrived at Evelyn's house expecting to sign a joint petition asking me to release the funds, my Aunt Karen stood up in the middle of the living room. Karen pulled out a printed copy of the court filings that my lawyer had made public record. She looked at Evelyn, looked at Mark sitting in the corner with his head in his hands, and said, "You expect us to chip in and bail Mark out after he slept with Clara's sister while she was in the hospital for IVF? Have you lost your minds?" Asterisk. The entire room erupted into chaos. "Do you think extended family members should stay out of marital disputes, or is it fair for them to hold toxic relatives accountable? Let me know your take down in the comments." One by one, every single relative walked out of Evelyn's house, refusing to give Mark a single dollar. My mother-in-law's grand plan to keep everything quiet and respectable completely blew up in her face. Instead of a clean, hidden transition into a new family unit, the entire community found out exactly what Mark and Sarah had done. Sarah had to call her own savings branch and drain her personal retirement fund just to clear the hospital billing hold so she could take the twins home. And Mark, he had to move back into his childhood bedroom at his mother's house, living on a court-monitored monthly allowance while the state asset division went through. They thought they were going to take my home, my money, and my dignity. Instead, they were left holding the massive financial and social bill for their own greed. I sat in my apartment that night, looking out at the quiet city lights, feeling a profound sense of stillness. For 10 years, I thought I was fighting to save a marriage. In reality, I was just surviving inside a den of people who only valued me for what I could provide. Removing them from my life wasn't a loss, it was the ultimate liberation. When someone betrays you so deeply, do you think moving on in silence is the hardest part, or is watching them suffer the consequences the real closure? Drop your thoughts below. Wait, let's fast forward 6 months down the road, because karma always has a way of finishing what the law started. I received the final decree absolute from the family court clerk, stamped and signed by the judge. Because of the explicit evidence of asset concealment and financial fraud, the court awarded me 85% of the total marital equity, including the entire ownership of our home. Mark was ordered to pay back every single dollar he siphoned into that offshore account, on top of covering my entire legal fees. He didn't just lose his marriage, he completely dismantled his own financial future. He couldn't afford a down payment on a new house. He couldn't afford the luxury lifestyle he promised my sister. In fact, he was forced to sell his luxury car just to keep up with his child support payments and legal restitution obligations. And as for Sarah and Mark's grand romance, turns out, when you build a relationship on deceit, secret hotel rooms, and stolen money, it falls apart real fast under the crushing weight of real life. Without my income supporting Mark, and without Mark's hidden funds paying for Sarah's dream life, the fairy tale shattered into constant arguments over bills, stress, and diaper changes. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Sarah moved back into a small rented apartment, raising the twins mostly on her own, while Mark remained stuck in his childhood bedroom at his mother's house. Evelyn, the woman who cared so much about her family's precious reputation, now has to live with the fact that her entire social circle knows exactly how she enabled her son to betray his own wife for money. They wanted a clean, quiet victory at my expense. Instead, they got a loud, public lesson in what happens when you cross someone who knows how to stand up for themselves. Do you think Sarah and Mark's relationship stood any real chance once the money dried up, or was it doomed from the start? Let me know your thoughts down below. Looking back on this whole ordeal, I realized something powerful about human nature. Sometimes, the best response to a massive betrayal isn't screaming, crying, or seeking instant revenge. It's getting cold, getting organized, and letting the law handle the heavy lifting while you protect your peace of mind. Silence isn't weakness, it's strategy. And when people build a foundation out of lies and greed, you don't even have to push their house down. You just stand back, stay quiet, and watch it collapse under its own weight. Thank you so much for listening to this entire story on Unspoken Confession. What is your absolute final verdict on Clara's strategy? Would you have handled things with the same icy calm, or would you have confronted them the moment you found out? Drop your thoughts in the comments section down below. I read and heart as many of your comments as I can. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that like button, share this video, and click subscribe so you never miss a brand new story every single day. Take care of yourselves, set your boundaries high, and I'll see you in the next one.